Mr. Dan Goodwin is a professional mountain climber, but he is famous for climbing some of the tallest buildings in the world. And when I say climb, everyone here working narcotics, you're all risk takers. When I say climb, Mr. Dan Goodwin climbs a building without a safety rope, without a harness. He climbs it like a spider all the way up. Thus the name Spider Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to make him feel welcome. He is really an extraordinary individual. Please welcome Mr. Dan Goodwin.
Thank you. Thank you, Gilbert. That was awful nice. Wow, look at this. This is quite amazing. You know, when Gilbert invited me to come speak before you, you know, I was like, going, wow, this is just amazing that I'm being invited to speak to such an amazing group of people. And he had no idea what I'm going to share with you, why I'm here. And I think it's really important for us to all think about it, why you're here. You know, you may be here because there are different reasons that you may think you're here for on the outside. Maybe it's you're here because it's just the thing that you do every year. Maybe it's because, you know, there's cool weapons that you can check out a few seminars, get the hours that you need. But what I want to challenge you on is I get this to work. Hold on. Bear with me. It was working. I'll just press, see if that works. Okay, maybe we can get this to work here. I want you to really think about why you're here. Because when you really get down to it, the reason why you're here is how you're going to end up having a bulletproof mind. And that's one thing that I want to share with all of you, is who here would like to have a bulletproof mind? A mind that is capable of deflecting even the most negative thoughts during the worst situations you can possibly be in. I know that one of the things that I have learned over the time is exactly how to create that, because as you're going to see, I intentionally put myself in a lot of situations that you guys do all the time. And what you need to do is learn how to deflect those thoughts that come. And I'm going to see if I can get this to work here. There we go, finally. So, how you have a bulletproof mind, believe it or not, is going to have to do with why you chose this occupation in the first place. Think back. What made you decide to become a cop? I'm sure each and every one of you has a reason. Maybe it was because you got tired of seeing drug dealers turning kids into drug addicts. Maybe you get tired of seeing your communities turned upside down and literally destroyed in front of your eyes. We've seen it happen in Mexico. It's really sad and tragic. A lot of us don't even want to go to Mexico anymore, out of fear of something happening to us. It is my belief that behind every single decision that we make, there is a compelling reason. You know, and it could be someone in your family had a drug problem. Maybe it was your mom or dad. Maybe it was yourself. Maybe it was a good friend of yours. But somewhere down inside, that was the reason why you decided you wanted to become an undercover narcotic agent. Am I right? Something drove you to it? Well, believe it or not, that is the first step into developing a bulletproof mind. And so, I want you to really think about what your reason is. Because as we go through this, you're going to find out what my reasons, why I am here. I'm about ready to share that with you. Because Gilbert had no idea. that my brother was a cocaine addict, crack cocaine, actually, and he's no longer with us. Sad to say, 2-3 years ago, my brother hung himself. Wow. Believe me, there's not a day that I go by that I think about my brother and I wonder, wow, is there anything that I could have done differently? Could I have possibly helped him in some way? And I tried, believe me, my family tried. We enrolled him in all these different programs. When he was not on crack, he was the most wonderful guy, just this beautiful human being. You probably have known these people before. Someone dear to you. Someone that you really cared about. And then you just watch them get on drugs, and next thing you know, wow, their personalities change. Everything changes about them. And my brother was the same way. I remember the last phone call that I got from him. You know, it was just this wonderful phone call. It's like, hey, bro, I'm thinking about coming out to California, because that's where I'm from. I'm from Palo Alto. And you know, I'm thinking about coming out to California, and I can't wait to get out there. I'm so excited about that, and just can't wait to see you and hang out on the beach, and call me. So I called him back like literally 5 minutes later, and it was a completely different person. Yeah, what do you want? And I'm like, wow, Jerry, is that you? He says, what are you calling me for? And I said, brother, you just called me. No, I didn't call you. And I said, brother, Jerry, you just called me. And he goes, no, I didn't call you. You're just, he says, you leave me the fuck alone. And he hung up the phone. I called him back. No answer. I called him back about a dozen more times. No answer. And I just had this creepy feeling inside me that something bad was going to happen. Because my other brother, John, we both talked about it, and we said, you know, there's only 3 options that my brother has. Either one, he's really going to get together and clean up his act. Or number 2, he's going to end up getting killed by some drug dealer or killing himself. Or 3, he's going to end up in prison. He chose to kill himself. So I never got a chance to even say goodbye to him or hug him again. And from that moment on, I thought, if I get an opportunity to do something, to give something back to all of you, if there's some way that I can give you a slight advantage, an edge over, you know, the drug dealers, the drug lords, all those people that you got to deal with all the time, I want to give that to you. So when Gilbert asked me, thank you, Gilbert. It was my opportunity to give back to all of you. So I'm honored to be here. So that's my reason for being here. And I want you to continue to think about why you're here. Because the number one question that everyone's always been asking me is, why? And I'll get to that in a moment. Recently, I was just a couple weeks ago. How many people have been to Lake Tahoe, California? Okay, a few of you. It's a beautiful place. A couple weeks ago, they had what was called a Wanderlust Yoga Festival. Thousands and thousands of people show up from all over the world, and they take yoga classes from some of the greatest yoga masters. And the theme that they had was, what was your true north? Now, on the surface, you go, what do you mean true north? Well, I want you to think about that for a second, because you can take a compass, and you can shake it all up. You can throw it in a box, shake it all up, throw it in a closet, pull it back out, pull it back out again, and guess what? It always finds its true north again. Well, in many ways, our minds are very much the same way. You know, we go outside and we have no control of what's going on out there. We have no control of the traffic or the weather. And our minds sometimes could be spinning with all different thoughts. But yet, the key is figuring out a way of how you can get your mind to always find that true north, so that you can get focused and clear instantly. Compass doesn't take very long to get back in true north. You pull it out literally in a matter of what? 1, 2, 3 seconds? It's back in true north again. Your mind can do the same thing. And so what we're going to be going through here this afternoon is some of the techniques that I have developed on how to do that, of how when you're in the most stressful situations, when your life is on the line, your buddy's life on the line, and everything is at stake where you could actually die if you don't do it, how do you achieve that crystal clear mind? So that's what we're going to be talking about. And to give you something a little bit about me, because, you know, it's like, well, how did I get to be thinking like this? And I was born in Cape Porpoise, Maine, on a street called Fisher's Lane. All my neighbors were fishermen. My dad was a general contractor. He built homes for all of them. And on the outside, it really seemed like we had everything going for us. And we did in many ways, because it was very nice to be surrounded by so many individuals that were just kind of devoted to just a simple cause. And that cause was just basically feeding people with fish and lobsters. I remember one time going out when I was a teenager, and I was on this fishing boat, and we had to leave at 3:30 in the morning. And you know, I always sat down because I had to keep my eyes focused on something other than the ocean, because I would get seasick in a matter of hours and I'd be puking my guts out. So I was riding along, and I just remember all of a sudden the captain of the boat, all of a sudden he's puking over the side. It was really rough. And I'm thinking, God, what happened with him? And the guys are all giving him shit. And he gets up and he goes, God damn, wife should have known that she shouldn't made me blueberry pancakes. It doesn't mix with beer. So, you know, blueberries and beer, I guess, don't go well together. So that was my experience being raised in Cape Porpoise, Maine, which ironically happens to be right next to Kennebunkport, Maine, where George Bush family goes up every summer. But at one time, my parents had a real problem in the family. And my mother left and she went back to California. And my father and my other brother was staying with my dad. And my mom came back, and it was Thanksgiving Day. And I remember sitting there, and at the time it was during the Vietnam War. It was just starting to come to an end. My dad was in a real foul mood, and he was really pissed off that we were losing the war, and thought it was because of all the goddamn hippies, is his words. And at the time I had long hair, so I all of a sudden fit into that category. And he was wondering why I wasn't eating the turkey. And at the time, I was a vegetarian. You know, I was just 15 years old, and so I thought I would be doing something that I thought was cool and hip. So my dad didn't like that, and he gets up on the table and grabs me by the hair, and he's trying to stuff a turkey bone in my mouth. And I rip it away from his hands, and I go upstairs and I packed my bag, stuffed it with my yellow bean backpack. Sleeping bag was all wool, and my clothes, and I exit out the door. And when I left home, I had no idea where I was going, what I was going to do. I had no money, no home, and it was pouring rain. It was pitch black, and it was November in Maine. So I remember from that point on, I had to develop all my resources in terms of how I was going to be thinking my way through this. And I started realizing that many of the people that I had really looked up to over the years, there was Bruce Lee that really inspired me, his way of thinking. And you know, I started trying to be like that I could just be anywhere and develop this mind where I could, no matter what situation it was, I could just be sleeping on the side of the road and I would still be at peace. You couldn't destroy my happiness, no matter what you did to me. And so, as time went on, I started developing what I didn't realize was my own way of thinking. And as time went on, as I climbed the buildings, the big question that was always asked was, why? Why did you risk your life to climb all these buildings? Now, I asked you just a little bit a moment ago why you guys are all here. Because I really want you to think about that. You may think that you're here just for the convention. You may think you're here just because you're scoring the hours. You may think that you're here because you're checking out the stuff. But actually, I think you're actually here, whether you realize it or not, for a much greater reason. And it has to do with what made you into a cop in the first place. Just like why I climbed the buildings. Now, why I climbed those buildings had to do with the MGM Grand Hotel fire. Now, the MGM Grand, at the time, was one of the biggest hotels in Las Vegas. I was there as a climber, and I was putting up new routes in a place called Red Rock Canyons. How many people have been to Las Vegas? A lot of you. So when I witnessed this fire, I remember pulling up, and I'm like looking at this, and I'm just going, oh my God, I'd never seen a fire like that before. I had seen, houses on fire, being from Maine, but I'd never seen a big giant building like this on fire. And I just got through climbing in Yosemite Valley. And in Yosemite Valley, the cliffs are thousands of feet high. And I saw a dramatic rescue where helicopters came in and they actually plucked a group of climbers off the side of a cliff by lowering them down on a cable. And actually the helicopters swung the people in and actually were able to get onto the cliff, grab hold of them, put them in a basket, and then they turned around and swung away. And I'm looking at this fire, and I'm seeing all these people, hundreds and hundreds of people trapped in the middle of the building. They had helicopters rescuing people off the roof. They had the fire trucks at the base, but they were only going up like 7 floors. They looked like little toy trucks at the base of the building. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I think I know how we can get to those people. And then I see this lady climbing down this rope of bed sheets. I don't know where she thought she was going, but she obviously was trying to get the heck out of where she was. And I'm watching her, and this police officer grabs me as I'm ducking underneath the caution tape, and he says, hey buddy, where do you think you're going? And I said, I think I know how to rescue those people. And he says, oh yeah? And at that moment, we heard this blood-curdling scream. And it just paralyzed everyone. Everyone just went dead silent, and they all turned as they watched this woman fall and hit the pavement. I could almost hear the audible thud. And I remember turning as she hit, and I thought, oh my God, I just thought I was going to puke because I had never seen anyone die before. I'm sure all of you have seen that, but I had never, at that time in my life, I had never seen anyone die before. And if you think back when you first saw someone get killed, it's pretty dramatic, isn't it? So the police officer had the same effect on him. He turns to me and says, hey buddy, follow me. So the police officer led me through this chaotic maze of fire trucks, hoses. I mean, it was just chaos. Water everywhere. And he brings me up to this fire chief, and he says, hey, chief, I got this guy who thinks he knows how to rescue these people. And he says, oh yeah, well how? And I proceed to tell him my ideas about how we could lower someone down. He says, well, we can't do that because of the smoke and everything. I says, well, how about having someone climb up? And we could trail a cable and ferry the helicopter to the helicopter and actually start ferrying people off the building. And he said, well, it's a great idea, but who in the heck are we going to get to do that? And I said, I would. And he looked at me and he says, well, you're crazier than I thought. He turns to the police officer and says, escort this guy out of here. So I'm escorted away. And I'm looking back and I'm thinking, but it would work. And the police officer says, I know it would work, but you heard the chief. So I'm led away, and the following day I hear that 84 people had died. A dozen or so, there was nothing they could have done because a lot of them were at the base of the building where the fire started, but a good majority of them were trapped in the middle of the building. They found them in their bedrooms, they found them in the hallways, they died of smoke inhalation. And I was thought, oh my God, and this wave of guilt overwhelmed me, of thinking, I should have done more. I didn't know what I should have done, but I felt like I should have done something. I felt like I should have stood up more. I felt like I should have been more powerful, and I should have said, no, I am going to do something about this. I don't care what you say. I'm going to do something. But I didn't. That bothered me, that I didn't do more. So I went back to the fire station, And there was many of them, and I wasn't sure which one to go to or if I'd even meet the same fire chief. And then I turned around and I met this fire chief, and he's sitting behind his desk, and I see the newspaper. He's looking at the same headlines as me, and it's saying 84 people had died. And he looked like a general that just lost the war. And I remember going, can I have just a moment of your time? And he looks at me and he says, well, are you a reporter? And I says, no, I'm not a reporter. I said, I'm just a concerned citizen that wants to talk to you. So I sit down with him for a moment and I tell him my ideas. I said, you know, I may not be the leading authority on this, but I do know some people in Yosemite Valley, that's all they do. And I think they know how to rescue these people in the future. And I think if you guys team up, we might be able to come up with a plan where if this happens again in Las Vegas, you guys could rescue these people. He turns to me and he says, well, what unit did you say you're with? And I said, I'm not with any unit. He says, well, who are you? And I said, I'm Dan Goodwin. And he says, well, what's your expertise? And I said, I'm a climber, a rock climber. He says, well, let me ask you something. Have you ever climbed a building? And I looked at him and I thought, what does climbing a building, other than I could have climbed that day, but what does climbing a building actually have to do with rescuing people or fighting a fire? And I turned around and said, no. He says, well, until you do, I don't want you coming into my office and telling me how to fight a fire or rescue people on high-rise buildings. And I'm like, wow. And I walked out the door, and from that moment on, I knew I was going to climb a building. I had no idea what building I was going to climb, how I was going to climb it, but I knew I was going to climb a building. That became my compelling reason. How many people know about Spider-Man? Of course, most everybody does. Stan Lee, I remember hearing this quote years ago. If you possess the ability to do some good, to help someone, then you damn well ought to. And I remember that being kind of my compelling reason of what I wanted to do, just like all of you in here. You're here because you want to do some good. You want to make a difference in the world. And so that became a theme for me. I was just thinking of that. And I remember trying to figure out what building I was going to climb. And a buddy of mine said, hey, have you thought about climbing the Sears Tower? And I said, what's the Sears Tower? And he goes, it's the world's tallest building. And I said, well, where's that? And he goes, it's in Chicago. And I remember going through Chicago. I mean, Chicago is this amazing city. And I just remember hitchhiking, actually. And got a ride with a truck driver, and the truck was just weaving down the road because the wind was blowing so hard. And I remember seeing the tall buildings. And when I saw the picture of the Sears Tower, I go, I know that building. And he says, well, check out this article and read this article. So I read this article, and it was about someone had tried climbing the Sears Tower before me. And in fact, it wasn't the first attempt, it was the second attempt. And at the bottom of the article it said, and it was a quote from the fire commissioner, William Blair, who said, the building was impossible to climb unless he was perhaps Spider-Man. And I'm like thinking, Spider-Man? Huh. He says, that's who you should dress up as. And I go, dude, I would not be caught dead in a Spider-Man suit. Are you kidding me? My God. Well, I have a son. And at the time, he was only 4 years old. And his mom, we weren't together anymore, but she drives up and she wanted to know if I could take care of him. And he gets out of the car. And this is my son at that time. His name is Kia. And my buddy goes, well, let's ask your son what he thinks you should wear. So my son, he looks at me and he goes, he had a Spider-Man toy. I wish I had a picture of that, but he holds up the Spider-Man toy and says, I think Spider-Man. And I'm like going, dude, that's not fair. I mean, of course it's his favorite thing. But that led to me to all of a sudden he turns to me, my buddy, and he says, well, if you dress up as Spider-Man, I'll make you the costume. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll dress up as Spider-Man. That's going to be, I thought, well, why not? It'll add a little sense of humor to it. I never thought of where it would take me down the road. But my compelling reason always went back to proving to this fire chief that I knew something about how to fight fires and rescue people in the high-rise buildings. Even though it was just conceptual, I knew that I had something. So I get back to, what is your reason for being here? And I know it's not an easy one to answer because sometimes you have to think about it, But I really want you to think about it, because if you really want a bulletproof mind, I'm letting you know right now that this is your key, the key that will help you have that bulletproof mind. Why are you here? Keep asking yourself that as I go through this. Keep asking yourself, because something inside you is going to click. And all of a sudden, you may end up going, wow, I do remember. I mean, it's been so long, and maybe it's been 20, 30 years that you've been in this force. And all of a sudden, something brings you back to what made you the very first day when you decided to become that cop, to make that difference. That's going to be the key to opening that door for you to be in that bulletproof mind. So one of the things that I had to deal with is fear. My God, I'm going to go climb the world's tallest building. I haven't even climbed one building, not even a 5-story building. And here I'm looking at a 110-story building. How am I going to do that? I had not a clue how I was going to do that. I didn't dare tell anyone, because I knew anyone that I was going to tell would think I was absolutely raving mad. Dan, are you crazy? You're going to go climb the world's tallest building? Shouldn't you start on something smaller? I mean, that makes logical sense, doesn't it? Start on something smaller. But when you really think about it, what happens when you fall from 5 stories? Most likely, you're not going to walk away from it, right? So really, in my mind, I started realizing that it really didn't matter if I was 5 stories up or 110 stories up. The end result was going to be the same. We call it the death zone. And many times when you guys are doing your missions that you're doing, you know what you're doing could involve some violence. Someone could go down. You're hoping it's not you. You're hoping it's not your buddy. But someone could go down. That's why you're wearing a Glock. So, it is true. There is nothing to fear but self. But what I came to the realization was, when I really started thinking about fear, because I really made this part of my study, what is fear? Think about that for a moment. Fear is not something that you can put inside of a glass jar, like a butterfly. It's not something you can put under the microscope and look at it and analyze it and determine what it is. There's no way of even measuring fear. But yet, at the same time, fear has the ability to make nations go to war. It can destroy relationships out of jealousy. It's all fear. Just imagination. You're imagining your partner having an affair on you. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. It can destroy companies. I see it happen all the time. Companies who were once at the top are suddenly out of business because of lack of innovations. They were afraid to invest the money. It's all your imagination. And once you realize this, once you realize that fear is nothing more than a fiction of your imagination, that's something that you have created inside your mind, there isn't anything that you can't do. So when I started realizing that I was going to climb this building, and I knew that I had to figure out a way of how to do it, I was like going, okay, my mind started opening up. How am I going to do this? And I'm like walking around, and for the first time in my life, how many have heard the expression, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at changes? Well, from the moment I started thinking about climbing a building, all of a sudden now I'm looking at buildings as things to climb. I never looked at them that way before. Sure, I marveled at the incredible architecture, and I thought, wow, that's just so amazing that someone could build something so tall. I just imagined what it would take to do that. But I never thought about climbing it until that fire chief had actually said to me, have you ever climbed a building? Now that's all I could think about. Suddenly now it's all I can think about. It was consuming all my thoughts. And I knew that if I was going to get on a building, there'd be no turning back. The moment I left the ground, there'd be no turning back. I remember walking down, I revisited the MGM Grand Hotel because they were bringing pieces of glass back. They're trying to get it back to where it was. And I saw these guys carrying these big, giant plate of glass with suction cups. And I'm like, wow, suction cups, I never thought about that. Suction cups. And I walked up and I asked the guys, so where do you get these things? And they said, oh, you can get them at this construction place. You can get suction cups. So I went and I ordered myself a pair. I got them and I thought, wow, you hold these suction cups and you put it on the glass and you pump it up and it sticks, amazing, and you can't pull it off. And I thought, well, how do I get so I can actually hold my weight? And I thought, okay, well, I put it on and figured out a way how I could hook, and I had these loops that I could put for my feet called H3As. And I pulled myself up and I go, well, how do I support myself? I can't hang on. How do I even put the other one on? Next thing you know, I go the harness and I go, okay, you have a little hook. And I hooked myself in and I can lean back. And I learned something about suction cups. You can take a suction cup and you can stick it on your refrigerator or into your counter. And you can slide it all around. Try it sometime. You'll have fun with it now that I've shared this with you. And it'll slide around. And then you try to pull it off. And damn, it's really hard to pull off. And it takes a bit to pull it off. Well, the suction cups work the same way. They are only designed to hold 70 pounds. That's why you see them always carrying with 3 or 4 suction cups. But if you lean back on it, and just lean back, real creepy feeling. Especially, I mean, I first started doing it in Las Vegas. There was this alleyway. And on this alleyway was this wall of glass, and it was dark. And I didn't have a clue how I was going to do that, because I thought that you had to pump it up like this here, and I thought, no, it's got to be a little more efficient doing it with my thumb. So I started doing martial art push-ups with my thumbs, and I was getting damn good at it. I could do 100 of them. But I started doing calculations of how many times I was going to have to do this all the way up to 110 floors, and it was over 10,000 times. I'm going, oh my God, there's no one on earth could possibly do it that many times. So I had to come up with another way. So I created this hook that would go on top of the lever, and when I reached up, I could actually pump it. And you'll see how I do it. And that all of a sudden was this innovation that came to my mind because I had to create it. And so when I'm at the Sears Tower, I'm racing ahead here, and now I'm standing at the base of the world's tallest building. I have a Spider-Man suit on. I have a baggy coveralls because I didn't want anyone to see me with a Spider-Man. So it's not like you can walk down the street with a Spider-Man suit with some suction cups and no one's not going to notice. So I also knew that there was no way that I could get on this building in broad daylight. And so I picked Memorial Day because I figured, okay, there'd be least amount of people there and no one would possibly see me. So I got there, it was a Friday, Memorial Day was like on a Monday, and I pretended to be homeless across the street. I slept with a cardboard box over my head. I had my backpack against a dumpster, and I just watched the security guards, just watched what they were doing, started timing their sequence of when they were taking breaks, and sure enough, around 4:15 in the morning, they were taking a break. And for about 10-15 minutes, there was no one there. So I thought, that's when I'm going to hit. But the more I looked at the building, I came to the realization that, oh my God, how am I going to get up onto the glass? The front entrance of the Sears Tower has this glass roof that lets you in. And the only way you could get onto this one main section that takes you all the way up the building was getting up onto the roof. What I needed was a ladder. And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do. So I remember like going, oh God, this is ridiculous. I have everything I need to get up this building, but I can't even get onto the building because I need a ladder. What a joke this is. So I ended up walking to Lincoln Park, and I'm at Lincoln Park, and I'm sitting there, and the rain kind of comes to a stop, and I'm just kind of looking up at the trees, and the water's dripping off the leaves. And this guy walks up to me, and he says, "Are you a climber?" And I'm looking around, just thinking, how on earth could you possibly know I was a climber? And he said, my brother is climbing Everest as we speak. I said, your brother? Who's your brother? He goes, Peter Hackett. And I remember hearing about Peter Hackett because Peter Hackett was a medical doctor who went on a lot of these expeditions. His brother was climbing Everest, as I was talking about the world's tallest mountain. Well, I was going to climb the world's tallest building. Think about that. Coincidence, huh? So we got talking, and he says, well, what are you going to climb here? And I told him. I knew it was a risk that I was taking, because he could have turned around and just said, dude, you're crazy, and made a call, and it would have been the end of the story. But he says, well, how can I help? And I said, well, you wouldn't by any chance have a ladder, do you? And he says, well, a matter of fact, I do, but how tall does it need to be? And I looked at him and I smiled, 110 floors. And so it turns out he had this little ratty-ass ladder that was like 12, 15 feet long. And he had a Volvo that he'd strapped it onto the top of his car. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, he drops me off in an alleyway, and he gets out. We give each other a hug. I turn around and I'm walking along. I had this overalls of my Spider-Man suit and a duffel bag with my suction cups. And I'm just kind of strolling along, trying to time it. And all of a sudden I dart into the corner, and I remember being in this dark corner, and my heart was just, and I'm starting to sweat. It's freezing cold out, but I'm sweating. And I'm having a hard time. My hands are starting to shake. And I'm like going, oh my God, how do I get this fear under control? Because it was really, I wasn't even sure if I could even get on the building with a ladder or without a ladder. I wasn't even sure if I could even get up the ladder. You probably have had that experience before, where you remember your first, bust, kicking down that door. Well, this was kind of my first experience. And my buddy shows up with a ladder, and we get ready to put the ladder up, and all of a sudden a car's coming. And we jump back down, and the car goes by. It's a taxi cab. Whew. Get back up, put the ladder up. Ladder goes up, give each other a clap on the hands. I race up the ladder, but we had forgotten to hook the hooks. And next thing you know, the ladder's going cha-ching, 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 back down, and I leap for the roof, and I grab the roof, and I wrestle myself, and I roll over. And when I roll over, I land in a puddle of water, because it had been raining all weekend. And I'm laying there, and I'm looking up at the world's tallest building to the summit, laying in a puddle of water. I can't even see the summit, because the summit's got this, it's all shrouded in clouds, and it kind of is lit up because of the office tower, the lights. And he's taken off. Now I'm all alone. I'm on the roof of the world's tallest building, and I have my suction cups, and I stand up, and I'm looking at this wall of glass, and it's all black. I can barely see, but I can see my reflection. It's kind of weird seeing yourself kind of walking towards a wall of glass, and you're like looking at it and you're going, wow. And it's just like a mirror. And I'm just seeing myself in the Spider-Man suit. It's the first time I'd actually seen myself in a Spider-Man suit, and I almost had to step back because it was kind of creepy. And so I take the suction cup, and I put it up against the glass, and I start pumping it up, and it made more sound. I mean, I thought I made a lot of sound in Las Vegas, but for some reason, I don't know if it was just the sound effects that was happening there, but it just sounded as I was pumping it up. And I could not get the suction cup to stick. It just kept sliding all over the glass, and I'm going, oh my God, you're kidding me. And I pull it off, and I'm looking at him, and I'm going, wow, I mean, what's going on? I didn't know it at the time, but the Sears Tower, when they window wash the glass, they actually spray a tiny little thin silicone film onto the glass to keep the glass from getting scratched. I didn't know that, but that was actually affecting my suction cups. So I came up with an idea of like, well, maybe I'll just lower it down a little bit more. So I had actually, I wanted it up here, and instead I had to bring it down here so I could put more pressure on it. And it stuck. And I'm going, excellent. And so I get myself up, I lean back in, I lean back on the first suction cup, I'm reaching up, slap the next cup up, lowering it back down, pumping that up, and all of a sudden the one I'm on starts slipping, and before I could do anything, it pops off. And I land on my back, shabam, on my back, right onto the glass roof, back in the middle of the water. And I'm laying there, and the back of my head is just throbbing. And I'm like looking up going, oh my God. And I roll over, and I'm looking back up, and I'm going, wow, that was not a good sign. How am I going to do this? And I thought, okay, it's a number game, isn't it? It's you guys have all been there before, where something maybe didn't work out the first time, and you're looking back on it, and you're thinking about, well, how do I do this? Because you know you can do it. So I'm looking back at that, and I go, okay, let's see if I can do this again. So I get up on it, and I started counting. 1001, 1002, and I'm pumping it up. The next one, I get that one on, boom, and I reach back up, clip in, reach back down. It was just as fast as I can go. Pull that one up, boom, bam. I had about 30 to 60 seconds before the suction cup started slipping. And so as long as I kept moving and using the same technique, it had to be perfect each time, I was able to make my way up. And I'm going to show you this video.
The hero of the moment got off with only a $35 fine.
It is evident that Dan Goodwin has captured the imagination of the public as well as Sears.
The fact that he wore a Spider-Man costume, I guess, is kind of flattering. I mean, Spider-Man has sort of become part of America's mythos. With great power comes great responsibility. The lesson of Spider-Man, if there is one, is if you are able to do something that will do good, that will help people, you damn well ought to do it.
So, some of those videos that you saw there where you saw me up high and you saw, if you were looking, my suction cups were slipping. That was on the 63rd floor. And it was a pretty scary moment because they had lowered the window wash machine down twice on me. And I traversed around them the first time, went back up. They lowered it down the second time. And as they lowered it down the second time, I realized what they were doing. They were trying to box me off to the right there so I couldn't do what I was doing. So I decided to go underneath them this time. They didn't know how to react to that. I remember seeing the guys just like looking at me in the inside. They're looking out at me and they're seeing the suction cups. And I'm like traversing across the glass. And all of a sudden, I can't get my suction cup to stick. Holy shit. I'm 63 floors up. And I'm holding on to one suction cup, and that's starting to slide. And I had these sky hooks that I hoped I had never used, but I had them just in case. And they were connected to my harness, and they're just basically a steel hook. And these sky hooks, I just placed onto the window's edge, and I remember just putting it on. And as I put it on, my suction cups, I'm hanging on to here, and all of a sudden that goes, ping, shoots off. And I'm back into the suction cup again, and it's sliding across, and I put it on again, and this time as I put my foot onto the HRE of that, the suction cup pops off, bam! And I'm now hanging on to just the sky hook, and I'm just got my fingers on the window's edge, and I eventually put my another sky hook on, and the guys on the inside, they were just like going back and forth. They were just freaking out because they thought that I was going to fall for sure. And it was then that they, from above, they sit in the window wash machine, yells down to me, "Hey, you, we have your attention." I remember looking up and they go, "What?" And he says, we just got a phone call and we given orders to let you go to the top. And I thought, wow, okay. Is this a trap? And they said, no, it's not a trap. We assure you, we've been given permission to let you go to the top. So they let me go to the top. And I was there in jail for 2 days. And they thought that I was put up by Marvel Comics. They thought Stan Lee actually had put me up to it. Because Marvel Comics at the time, I know it's kind of weird, but at the time, Marvel Comics was on the verge of going bankrupt. Think about it, Spider-Man almost went out of business. And in many ways, I heard later on that this actually saved his business. It brought Spider-Man back into the limelight. I didn't know that, but they kept me in jail. And while they kept me in jail, there was this fire commissioner, William Blair. You're going to hear more about him. You're going to see more about him, what he did. But he was really pissed off because he made a claim that it was impossible to climb unless Spider-Man climbed the building. And here was Spider-Man climbing the building. So now he felt like a fool in front of all his colleagues. And when he was left alone with me, he comes out to me and he says, "Did anyone ever tell you you look like a faggot in that suit?" And I looked at him and I'm like going, "Really?" "No, are you speaking from experience?" And he turned around, he was so pissed. You remember he reaches in, he's trying to grab me, and I just step back and I'm just smile. He says, "Well, you listen to me, good Spider-Man." He says, "If you ever come into my city and try climbing another building, I'll kill you." And I looked at him and I go, "You'll kill me?" And he goes, "That's right, I'll kill you." I said, "Well, guess what? I'll give you a call when I'm going to climb my next building." And he says, "Well, if you do that, mark my word, it'll be the last thing you ever do." So he storms off, and I'm sitting there in the jail cell and I'm going, wow, correct me if I'm wrong, but that'd be first-degree murder. If he actually carried it out and he killed me, that would be first-degree murder. So from that point on, I just started realizing that, one, I was going to climb another building. I didn't know what building I was going to climb yet. But this guy kind of pissed me off. And I started developing my mindset like Bruce Lee. It was kind of like the game of death, of going, okay, if I'm going to get it on with this guy, how do I beat him? And during that time, while I was training, I was contacted by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation here in Dallas. And you all know about the Hyatt Regency. You've seen it just across the street here. That is this building right here. The Hyatt Regency contacted me because they wanted me to climb their tower in conjunction with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation to raise money for them. So I flew down. I met with this child called Weldon Ford. Really a wonderful, wonderful kid. And my heart just went out to him. And his last wish, because they thought that maybe he would only live another year, was to see me climb. I'm like, wow, that's your last wish, to see me climb a building. And I thought, well, great. You're actually going to be able to see me climb here. Little did I know that tragedy was about ready to strike. And the Kansas City Walkway, I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that year, Kansas City Hyatt Regency had this big grand opening. And the walkway collapsed. And at the time, it was the biggest collapse, structural collapse in the history of the United States. Over 112 people got killed. And because of that, it was such a marketing disaster, they canceled all events, and mine was one of them. But I had already made a commitment to this Weldon Ford, and I said, you know, I'm going to climb a building anyway. I didn't know what building I was going to climb. But at the time, the Renaissance Center was the tallest building in Dallas. Beautiful building. Not as tall as the ones that we have here now, but at the time, it was the tallest. So I gave Weldon a call, actually the people that were caretaking him, and they met down at the base, and I climbed the Renaissance Center. And with a pair of suction cups, and it was so eerie, just being on the side of a building with a pair of suction cups. And the entire time, you know, people go, well, what goes on inside your mind? And I have to tell you, my mind is completely blank. It's dead quiet. All I'm thinking about is each and every move, because each move has to be perfect. It can't be any less than what was the move before that. I mean, when I'm up close to the top, 5 feet from the top, that move, that suction cup placement has to be just as perfect as the one that was at the very beginning. And so, that's the Spider-Man suit. It's a good shot of it. And you can see that I'm kind of using the window's edge with my feet, and I'm using the steel for my fingers. And the suction, I'm kind of like doing a mixture of hybrid of free climbing and using the suction cups. because I really didn't trust the suction cups for obvious reasons. When I got to the top, the media wanted to know, well, what are you going to do next? And I remember telling them, I remember looking at the crowd of photographers and cinematographers, and I remember saying, I'm going to go climb the John Hancock Center. And I said, well, even though William Blair, and I said, I'm going to tell William Blair I'm coming. And so I knew right then, when I made that announcement, that I effectively had walked up to the hornet's nest with a baseball bat and smacked it, because now William Blair knows that I was coming. So that night, after doing the fundraising at the Hyatt Regency, I carried Weldon Ford on my shoulders and ran him up the stairs. I had this really bizarre dream. And I mean, I have really vivid dreams. And this dream was really surreal, because I remember being on the John Hancock Center in Chicago. And for some reason, everything was just kind of like, I just remember seeing water coming down. And I remember trying to figure out how I was going to climb, and this piece of equipment appears in my hand, and I'm looking at this piece of equipment, it's this bent piece of steel, and all of a sudden I wake up from this dream, and I'm going, wow, the first thing that came out of my mouth, because my buddy was with me, and he goes, what was that all about? And I told him about my dream, and I said, well, give me a piece of paper. So I started drawing out what the equipment looked like, and I said, I got to order a wetsuit. And he goes, a wetsuit? What on earth are you going to order a wetsuit? No one climbs anything with a wetsuit. And I said, I got to order a wetsuit. That's what the dream was telling me. So I called up a friend who was a welder, and I faxed him, because we didn't have email back then. So I faxed him a drawing, and the drawing was of the equipment. And he said, well, I think I can make this. And I said, well, great. How quick can you make it? So I can make it today and FedEx it to you tomorrow. Where? And I said, Chicago. And there was this restaurant that I knew that someone was there you could FedEx it to. So I went and got a wetsuit and got this equipment made. And the entire time, my buddy thought I was absolutely out of my mind. He said, if you go to Chicago, I'm not going with you. He says, there's no way on earth that I'm going to be involved in this, because this is just an act of suicide. And my answer to him was this: a man who won't die for something is not fit to live. And I'm sure a lot of you can really relate to that in your own way, because I felt like if I had backed down and let this guy bully me, that I would back down each and every time something else came up in front of me. It could be anything. I'd find myself just cowering. And I knew that this was more of a challenge for me than anything else. So I said, I'm going to go climb this. And I realized that in order to climb this building, I had to dig deep. And I know each time you are all out there doing what you're going to do, there's a certain amount of courage that's involved. You're not taking on this job where you're doing something that just anybody can do. And I realized as I was preparing myself for it, something started coming up for me, because these emotions that I was experiencing, I mean, they just come in waves. Every time I thought about it, it would be like all of a sudden this fear just would come up to me, and I would just start feeling almost sick. And I realized that these emotions were really nothing more than like canaries in the coal mine. They were letting my mind know what I was actually thinking. Now, think about sometimes when you're doing different things, and whatever comes up here, it could be like, you could be all of a sudden experiencing anger. Someone says something you don't really like, and all of a sudden you find yourself getting pissed off. Well, what's really going on? It's your mind going off, really. And so I realized that all I really had to do was literally just switch the channel. Switch it to something that I really wanted to watch, something that I wanted to think about. And I started really focusing on myself climbing this building and getting to the top, because if I focused on all the other things, what did it do? It just evoked anxiety, fear, anger. And so I'm now in Chicago, and I'm looking up at this building, and it's 100 stories tall. And I realize that this is not going to be an easy climb, because I'm going to not only Now is I have to deal with climbing the building, but I'm going to have to deal with someone trying to kill me. And I'm not exactly sure how he's going to do it, but for some bizarre reason, I think my wetsuit has something to do with it. And when I climbed, sure enough, I had looking up and I remember seeing this water coming down on me. And I'm wondering, why is that water? It wasn't supposed to rain today. And I'm looking up and I see this guy with a fire hose aiming it at me, and it's gushing water. And the higher I climb up, the more pressure he's turned up. And next thing you know, they have the pressure turned on full. I found out later from some other firefighters that the orders were not to stop me, knock him off. The pressure was turned all the way up. So I'm clinging for my life. At any moment, I feel like I'm about ready to come off. And all of a sudden, the windows are shattering on either side of me. And these poles come flying out through the glass. And they're peeling back the glass. And they actually tried to stab me with the poles and actually knock my equipment loose. And the guys on the window wash machine were actually yelling at me, "I hope you fall, you motherfucker." And I'm like going, wow. Chicago Fire Department are pretty serious. Wow. So I pull out my rope, because I had a rope with me. And I hooked it in, and I was going to pendulum swing around the building. Because that's how I had gotten to that spot in the first place. They had brought down a window washing machine, and I turned around and swung to a different part, and that's when they turned the water on me. Now I'm going to swing to a different part of the building. And William Blair, he's just absolutely enraged. He's just out of control. I mean, this guy, what I found out afterwards, because it came out in court and stuff, his men were so freaked out. They were literally coming out of the elevators with their axes. They didn't have keys to the doors, so they were just busting down the doors with their axes, burst right in, and then they just walk up to the glass and they just start breaking down the glass. And so it was a very, very violent thing. And so when I told him that I was just going to swing to a different part of the building, he said, "Well, then I'll smash out every one in the building." I said, "Well, you better start smashing." And the mayor of the city ends up showing up. As you'll see in this.
Spider Dan's next objective was the 100-story summit of Chicago's John Hancock Center. He enlisted trainer Tony McGuire to help him prepare for the climb.
I came on to teach him what I had learned being a gymnast, so he could be stronger in all the different things he was trying to do.
Dan realized that suction cups wouldn't get him to the top of the Hancock.
I started studying the I-beams on the building and realized that I should develop a tool that would basically allow me to clamp it.
On Veterans Day, November 11th, 1981, Dan began climbing up the side of the John Hancock Center.
And there was no way that anybody was going to be able to catch him.
But Chicago Fire Commissioner William Blair had his own idea of how to stop Spider Dan.
I look up, and to my horror, I couldn't believe it, but I could see this guy leaning out of this air conditioning vent with a fire hose, aiming it right at me.
With Dan clinging to the side of the 37th floor, 338 feet in the air, Blair gave a controversial order to turn the fire hoses on Dan.
These guys are actually trying to knock me off the building.
Chicago Police Superintendent Richard Brezek arrived at the scene.
Because I'm trying to find out who gave that order, and we're trying to take control of the situation.
Obviously, in your judgment, then, this morning was not handled the best way it could have been.
It wouldn't have been my decision, I'll tell you that.
You're going to find out who gave the order?
We'll find out who gave the order, and I think that you know, this thing has to be settled as to you know, what's more appropriate as to how to deal with the situation.
That order came from Fire Commissioner William Blair. Police Superintendent Brezek disagrees with you on that.
That's his right. This is America, isn't it?
Said it was dangerous, was very upset that the water was sprayed.
That's his opinions, not mine.
I got up to the 38th floor where the fire commissioner was, and I went up to him and I says, "What the hell are you doing?" And he proceeded to explain to me that Goodwin uses suction cups, and they were trying to make it difficult for him to go up.
But Dan wasn't using suction cups. He was clamped onto the side of the building.
If he had been on suction cups, he probably would be dead right now.
I thought for sure he was a goner a couple times. I really thought that this was it.
that I was going to die, but I wanted to die at least fighting for it.
Dan hung on for life as Superintendent Brezek and Commissioner Blair battled over Dan's fate.
I asked him to look down below, and he had his fire trucks parked on the sidewalk there. And I told him that I control the tow trucks, and I was going to tow his fire trucks for being illegally parked.
The crowds are starting to chant. The people are freaking out.
At that point, Superintendent Brezek read a court order prohibiting Dan from climbing any further. But Dan ignored the order, and Mayor Jane Byrne was called in to settle the high-rise, high-profile problem.
As I pulled up, there was a huge crowd on the east side of the Hancock, and I thought, boy, what a mess. And I rode up, looked out the window when I got there, and perched like a bird right beneath me was Dan.
This lady's head popped out through the window, and it turned out it was the mayor of the city.
I said, do you realize you're breaking a law? Yes. I said, are you willing to go up at your own risk with no culpability to the city? Yes. And I thought, that's it, go.
And there he goes.
Nearly 6 hours after he began, Dan Goodwin conquered the John Hancock.
But the question remained about the purpose of this third high climb in Chicago.
And although the equipment is crude and is slow and dangerous, I think that if I had cooperation in the insurance company and building owners, that we could develop equipment that could be used very quickly and very safely and save lives in case there was a major fire in one of these major buildings, such as the John Hancock.
When we brought him out onto the street from inside the Hancock building, the crowd control problems arose again. Primarily young women breaking through the police lines, wanting to go touch him, kiss him. He was a celebrity.
I would think that anybody who could climb the world's tallest buildings would have to be considered some sort of a legend. I would like to think that his climbing the building was definitely a tribute to the spirit, to the essence, to the heroism that is Spider-Man.
That was nice of Stanley. Afterwards, there was a trial, as you can imagine, and it was held in the same room where the Chicago 7 trial was at, and it was packed like this, and they weren't sure what to do with me because I'm sitting there, and I have one attorney who handed me a card when I was being brought into the paddy wagon and said, call me. So that was my one and only call, was to him. And across me was probably about 20 different attorneys, representing the fire department, representing the mayor, representing John Hancock Insurance, John Hancock Building, I mean, just everyone. At the end of the day, they realized that they really couldn't do anything because my counter charges was attempted murder. And they realized that I had a good case, and so they dropped it. They got me for contempt because at the 37th floor, they were reading to me something some court injunction. I wasn't sure at the time because it's hard to hear whether it was court injunction or conjunction. I really didn't know the legal jargon at that time, what it meant. And I said, I don't care, I'm still going to the top. Well, that violated the court order, and so they got me for that. So I was given a year probation, and I had to stay in Chicago. So while I was in Chicago, I was offered a job to work in the Chicago Options Exchange. And so I'm there, and I'm working with one of the top traders on the floor. I was his personal assistant, and he was teaching me the ropes of how to trade on the floor. And I got pretty good at it, to the point where I was being offered a pretty lucrative position. And I finally got to the point going, no, this isn't really me. It just really kind of bothered me, the mindset. You know, how many have seen the movie Wall Street? You know, when they talk about greed. Well, that pretty much accurately portrays the mindset of Wall Street. They don't care about people like you and me. They don't care whether people, like during the crash of 2008, whether people lose their homes. They actually look at that as an opportunity to make money. I got really tired of that mindset, and I said, this isn't for me. And I was working with some guys on developing some equipment that could be used for actually rescuing people in high-rise buildings. So, but the question was, how do we get to do that? How do we get that message out? How do we attract the investors? And I started thinking about, you know, this really comes down to just trusting and believing, you know, just that what you're doing is the right thing to do. And it all goes back to why we're here. Why do you do what you do? And at that time, I thought, well, you know, why don't I just go climb the World Trade Center? And, you know, it's like, and while I'm at it, why don't I see if I can climb both of them at the same time? That was my intention, was to climb both at the same time. It's kind of weird that in '93, as we all know, they tried bombing one, they actually bombed one, and the intention was to knock one over to the other. And of course, in 9/11, we know what happened. They took both down. There's been this obsession with the World Trade Centers for a long time, and I had it before them, but for completely different reasons. I just wanted to climb them. So I remember thinking, well, if I climb that, a lot of the Wall Street guys that were in the World Trade Center, maybe I can get their attention. Maybe I can persuade them to think a little bit differently, naively. And so this is the World Trade Center ascent.
On Memorial Day morning, 1983, exactly 2 years after he made headlines in Chicago, Dan was in New York City at the base of the World Trade Center's South Tower.
About 9:30, I decided to go for it. And I suction cup up the first 4 floors.
The biggest concern was about him falling from the building because of, you know, the condition of the track.
Sure. You can talk to me on the way. My name's Dan. What's yours? Richie. All right. Pleasure. Dan. Yeah.
Do it. You're gonna do it. You are strong.
Great. Pack is heavy. Pack must weigh 30 pounds. The last thing I want to do is to fall. Last thing. I got too many things I want to do in my life. Too many friends. Too many loved ones. Very happy in life. I'm not unhappy. Now, if I was a suicidal case, then I'd really worry about it. So, I'm not worried about one. The thing I know is that when you do something like this, you pace yourself. You know, when you make mistakes is when you're rushing, trying to do something that you shouldn't be doing. And mistakes happen.
You're the wind. Let it give you energy, power. It's coming to you. It's seeking you out. It feels you are. You are one with it. You are it.
But 84 stories up, something went terribly wrong.
The window washing track starts pulling away from the building. There's no rope on me. I could just hit the ground.
The police offered to throw Dan a lifeline.
They thought that I was going to fall and begged me to take a rope.
Once he took our lifeline and everything else like that, and we seen that he was doing all right, we figured, well, let him make it to the top.
At 12:30 in the afternoon, Spider Dan completed his 3.5-hour climb of the 110-story building.
When I reached the top, I did what I did at the Sears Tower. I put a flag up.
So, after that, I was hoping maybe some investors might be interested, but none came rushing towards me. And this quote came to mind, that things work out best for those who make the best of things that work out. Well, what does that actually mean? It means that sometimes in life, things don't work out quite as you thought they were going to be. We've all had those experiences. The key, though, is figuring out a way of how to make what does work out work for you. Because it never really does work out according to plan, very rarely. So in basketball, it was always that case. And he was always figuring out ways of how he could make it so that his team could somehow win, even though they were losing. And with life, it's kind of that way. And I started thinking about, well, what do I do after this? And I was offered an opportunity to climb the CN Tower in Toronto. And that was, at the time, the world's tallest structure. It's over 100 floors. And a team had tried climbing it before me, and they had gotten about halfway, and they came back down, rappelled down, and they said the building was too dangerous to climb. But rumors were coming back that they were going to try it again. So the CN Tower contacted me and said, we're doing our 10th anniversary, and would you come? So I thought, okay, that'd be great. I'd be delighted to. And when I got there, everyone wanted to know, well, what equipment are you going to use? And I says, actually, I'm not going to use any equipment. And I started looking at buildings a little bit different. And from the last building, I started thinking, what can I do? So on this one here, I thought Guinness Book of World Records was there. And I thought, well, let's see how fast I can climb up it. So I climbed up the first side in 58 minutes. And then I rappelled down, ran to the other side, and climbed the other side in 1 hour and 2 minutes. And that established a new world record at the time. And little did I know, that was actually setting something up, because people in the climbing world weren't sure how to deal with me. A lot of the climbers were very traditionalist. They were, mountaineer background, and they thought that there's a certain way of doing it. I'm sure probably even in the police department you have the old school of way of thinking, and then you have the new school of thinking. And well, in the climbing world, it's kind of the same way. And when I'm climbing this is the second side, the winds were blowing. The flag, which was the Canadian flag, was the world's largest flag. They were going for the world's largest on everything. Almost knocked me off. It was kind of weird. The flag kept getting closer and closer, and it would come in like a bullwhip. And I made it up, and then I rappelled down. And again, it made headlines. And afterwards, when I was talking to the different climbing groups, they started saying, well, what is it that you're doing? I mean, because I knew that, I said, the difference between me and the other climbers is my mind. It has nothing to do with my physical abilities. Obviously, it pays to be in physical shape. But what I had over many of the other climbers was the fact that I had developed this technique of how to quiet the mind, of how to visualize exactly what it is that I wanted to see. Because every time something negative would happen, and I'm going to talk more about that here, and they did happen, I would visualize just the opposite. Every time, like on the Sears Tower, when my suction cups were about popping off, I kept visualizing. I mean, there were times when on the Sears Tower, when I was on the 63rd floor and my suction cups were popping off, I actually visualized, when the fear was just raging, I saw myself falling, and just falling backwards, and crashing through the glass and hitting the pavement, boosh! And I would snap my head back, and I would have to rechannel that thought instantly and focus on myself putting the flag at the top. Well, that was something that gave me power, and I didn't realize until later on that I could start applying that to the climbing world. So I started doing the same thing in the rock climbing world.
My name is Dan. I live to climb, and climbing's my game.
Dan Goodwin is the mild-mannered climber next door, but thousands across the country know him as Spider Dan. He's climbed 3 of the 5 tallest buildings in the world. When he's climbing glass and steel or the rock faces of the Pacific coastline, he's doing what he enjoys the most. He does it with no ropes, nothing to catch his fall, nothing but enormous self-confidence. Tell him he's just showing off, and he'll say he's just doing what he's good at, taking his life into his own bare hands.
In climbing, they have their ratings, and this is considered one of the more difficult climbs. Not the hardest climb, but just a very difficult climb. Climbing has a standard from 5.0 to 5.13, and this is a 5.12 and a moderate 5.12 at that. This climb has been called many different things. It's been called the Mickey's Beach Crack because someone died on this wall.
Dan doesn't want a climb named after him, so he keeps himself in astonishing physical condition. He's got more strength in his fingers than you do in your entire arm.
How I treat my body is like a fine-tuned machine. I want to run like a Ferrari or a nice Porsche, and it has to really cook, and it has to be able to move when I want it to move.
Dan found gyms boring, and when rock climbs were too few and far between, he started climbing buildings to get a workout. This gave him a bad reputation with building owners and their insurance companies.
Who told you you could come up here in the first place on private property this way and do these things? You read about this in the paper and then you thought you'd pull the same stuff the other fellow pulled, huh?
Wait a minute, he is the other guy. In fact, he became something of a folk hero when he climbed the world's tallest building, the 110-story Sears Tower in Chicago. The next challenge? The Hancock Tower, also in Chicago. And not even a court injunction could keep him on the ground.
Will anyone ever get up this building? I will.
Officials tried to spray him off the building with a fire hose. Eventually, they let him complete his climb. And even gave him a ride to jail.
At one time, it was illegal. One time, they tried to wash me off the side of the building on the John Hancock. Now, they pay me to go there, and they fly me up there.
Dan's adventures have taken a little getting used to for his family and friends. His mother would rather see his photos than be watching from 100 stories below.
Oh, I don't think I'd be a good spectator at all. I'd be too nervous.
Dan and his girlfriend Annie have made a life of climbing. She's a former commercial photographer who took one look at Dan and saw she had something to work with. The best way to make a climb challenging is to do it with your bare hands. Like a gymnast, he uses chalk for a better grip. It's his only insurance.
Some call it white courage. I call it chalk.
My fantasy is to climb. I climb to live. I live to climb. It gives me meaning, it gives me fulfillment in life. I would describe myself as a rock gymnast, an artist, who paints a picture on a cliff. The cliff is my apparatus.
As he makes his way up, his fingers wedge into tiny crevices in the rock. There's seldom a foothold, and never a rope. About halfway up, he's ready for his first maneuver, the fly-off.
There's another point just above that where I decided to add one more touch to it. And it had been something that I incorporated in a few other climbs, and that's a flag maneuver.
My mind is blank. My mind is nothing more than a visual. Fear of dying, actually, gives me power. Since I know that time is going to come, and I don't know when it's going to come, it has given me permission to do anything I want to do within my lifetime. I am being who I want to be.
So in the climbing world, I was changed in the climbing world, and I started calling what I was doing, because they said, well, what you're doing is no longer considered climbing. And I said, you're right, actually I'm doing what I call sport climbing. Now it's called sport climbing. And I had cruised along for a while, and I wasn't sure, because there wasn't any buildings taller at the time. I had climbed them all, the tallest. And no one was taking my ideas on high-rise rescue or firefighting very seriously. The '93 bombing had happened, and I was, at the time, I was drafting out the first draft of what is now called the Skyscraper Defense Act that I'm trying to propose, what I'm going to tell you more about. And all of a sudden, I'm coming back from Chamonix, France, snowboarding, because I snowboard. And I'm being told that I have cancer. Wow. You're kidding me. You sure you got the right diagnosis? Because I don't think you're talking to the same person here. Turns out they were dead right. And they said, well, we got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you're here and we caught it. The bad news is we're not sure if we can treat you. You're stage 4. Death is knocking on your door. And I didn't really know anything about cancer other than with my buddies, we'd sit around sometimes, and I have a lot of extreme friends who do a lot of extreme sports, from base jumping. A lot of them are dead now. And we'd all sit around the campfire and we'd talk about, geez, what would you do if you knew you had cancer? And this is before I had cancer, so it was kind of like, you know, the dread word. It's like, you know, the curse. What would you do? And, you know, we'd go around the circle and some guys say, oh, I'd base jump off of this. And some other guys say, I'd ski down Everest. And another guy, and they'd get to me and I said, well, I'd probably climb something that I knew I couldn't climb. I'd probably free climb El Cap and without a rope, knowing I probably wouldn't make it. And all of a sudden, I'm now facing that situation. Now, this is important for you guys to really take into consideration, because at one point, you're either going to know someone that's got cancer, or you may be diagnosed with cancer. And I can tell you right now, compared to all the missions that you've been on, all the operations you've been involved in, all the climbs that I've done, all the buildings I've climbed, nothing scared me more than cancer. Especially being told that I was going to die. I had a 20% chance of living. I wasn't sure if my treatments were going to kill me or if my cancer was going to kill me. I was so weak, I could hardly walk. And I remember parking in this handicapped parking spot. And this officer comes up to me, and I still looked in physical shape, but I was just so weak. And he looked at me and he says, sir, are you sure you are the holder of this plaque? And I said, yes, I am. And then I told him. And he came over to me and hugged me and almost cried because his mom had just passed away from cancer. And, you know, Charles, this is Charles Morris from El Paso, first contacted me because he wanted me to speak at the Cancer Foundation. And I was so honored because here I was, a stage 4 cancer survivor. And cancer is very big in your family. And recently just lost someone very close to you as well. I have some friends that are dying of cancer right now as well. And, but I want all of you to know, this is important to know, that it isn't a death sentence, okay? If it happens, you can beat it. And there's a lot of great treatments out there for chemo and radiation and everything else like that, but the one thing that will allow you to beat this disease, which I had to tap into myself because, you know, talking about negative thoughts, you know, the doctors aren't known for delivering the message to you really positively. You know, you're basically, dude, we got to stop your treatments, and I think you ought to get your things in order. And I'm like, wow, I'm on liquid morphine. And I was so depressed because this is not how I wanted to die. I mean, I thought I was going to die doing something great. I thought, like you, that you would die in the line of fire. You didn't want to die in some hospital bed with tubes inside you. I mean, you want to die at least doing something that made a difference. And here I was, dying the way I didn't want to die. I wasn't sure how to be with it. I really wasn't. The more morphine I drank, the more depressed I got. Eventually I got to the point where I decided I was going to kill myself. You know, and I know suicide's high in the police department. It's even higher in the military. So I understand what goes on, because there's a point in your life where you just start going, why bother? If this is it, why? Well, it was at that moment that I'm on the Golden Gate Bridge. And I was waiting for the stroke of midnight. I've always been kind of symbolic of just wanting things to just be symbolic in its own way. And I remember hearing the chime, and I'm drinking the liquid morphine, the last of it, and I'm hanging on to the cable, and I'm standing on the rail, and I'm like looking out at the city, and I just let go. And I remember at that moment, this light shot across and hit me, seriously, just hit me. And I landed on my back on the sidewalk. I don't know how long I was laying there for, but when I came to, and I remember rolling over and just going, oh my God, I just hit the pavement, just landing full on my back. I realized right then that the cancer was gone. I mean, don't ask me how I knew. I don't know how I knew. I just knew without a shadow of a doubt the cancer was gone. And I remember the following day I went to the hospital and I said, the cancer's gone. And they said, Mr. Goodwin, that's not possible. We showed that the cancer had metastasized and was spreading through your body. How could you possibly be gone? And so they did a check and they re-scanned me. And to they just couldn't believe it. The cancer was gone. The point that I'm trying to make is, I thought my story was unique. In some ways it is. But I've been hearing more, and since I've been speaking here, I've been hearing more and more stories about other people having similar experiences, not necessarily like mine, but when all of a sudden you tap into something in your mind, call it whatever you want. I mean, in some ways, I think maybe that was a divine intervention. Call it what you want. But that experience, I realized that I had to be at peace. You know, this wasn't going according to plan. I thought that I was going to live a different way, and here I am going to die, and I had to basically just put myself in God's hands and say, be with me. And that's when that happened. And this is another piece for you.
In March of 2000, 15 years after he survived the last of his daredevil days, 44-year-old Dan Goodwin was diagnosed with colon cancer. The cancer was advanced, and his doctor wasted no time.
He didn't perform a biopsy. He actually went up there and removed what turned out to be a tumor inside my lower colon tract.
That devastated me. That absolutely devastated me.
Danny was really pissed off that he got colon cancer. He thought, why me? I eat the best foods. I am always doing physical things, and I'm always in the best tip-top physical shape.
Danny had done all these dangerous things, put his life in harm's way so many, many, many times. You know, I thought that's the way it was going to go. Then when I found out about the cancer bit, you know, that was a tremendous shock.
Dan underwent a grueling regimen of chemotherapy and radiation.
I was determined to live.
Incredibly, just 4 months after it was first diagnosed, Dan learned that his cancer was in remission.
I still live in fear. I am fearful of the cancer coming back.
While there's a chance that his cancer could return, Dan now lives for the moment and has returned to what he loves most, climbing.
Danny is a real climber, one of the best in the world, without question.
If I was going to say what is my religion, it's climbing, because it's the one sport that makes me feel closest to God, if you're going to call it that. It makes me feel very spiritual, just being out in nature.
Dan was still healing when the harrowing events of September 11th, 2001 brought his memories of the World Trade Center flooding back in shockwaves.
I just walked around in a daze for the rest of the day. I just couldn't believe what happened.
2 years before, Dan had written a book about his famous building climbs. The last chapter proposed new methods for high-rise rescue. It was eerily titled the Skyscraper Defense Act.
Now, especially after 9/11, I feel it's my obligation to open up the dialogue towards high-rise rescue. If I could do that, climb the world's tallest buildings, surviving cancer, and end up standing before Congress proposing a bill for the Skyscraper Defense Act and making that bigger change, it will prove that the United States is maybe indeed the greatest country in the world, because it will prove that anybody can make it.
So, 9/11 had happened. And as you all know, losers focus on what they're going through. I could have just thought, oh, woe is me, I'm a cancer survivor. Or I could turn around and focus on where I wanted to go. And that's what I chose instead, because even though what happened was, cancer turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. I know that may sound bizarre and weird, like, dude, you can't be serious. You're saying that this was a gift to you, and it was. Because After I had climbed all those buildings, I kind of went into lull land of just kind of coasting along. And you probably have all done that. You did whatever it took to get you to where you got, and then all of a sudden you just started cruising along through life. And I was having a good time. I was mountain biking and snowboarding and climbing and doing all those things. But I really wasn't pursuing what got me into climbing the buildings in the first place. Whatever happened to that Dan that wanted to have the Skyscraper Defense Act? Whatever happened to developing the ideas that you had for high-rise rescue? Whatever happened to that guy? Well, after the cancer, I came to the realization the reason why God kept me alive, call it whatever you want, was that I was supposed to come back and do something good. This is part of it. This is part of me coming back, and this is the vow that I made. And one of the things that I had made was a vow that if I was going to survive, that I would give back. And so from that point on, I started thinking about ways of how I could do something about it. So I started working with different engineers and animators. And I started thinking about ways of how, you know, when the whole saying, when one door closes, another one opens. But so oftentimes we look so long and regretfully upon the door that's closed that we do not see the ones which opens for us. I felt like for the first time in many, many years, I could see again. And probably many of you probably have gone through experiences where, you know, you've been in the force for a long time and you start wondering, God, am I making a difference here? I felt that way. I can relate to probably a lot of you in the sense that you've been involved in this war against drugs. And to be quite honest with you, I think the war against drugs should be reclassified. It should be reclassified as a war against terror, because that's what it really is. What's going on in this country, what's going on in Mexico, that's terror. We should be doing more, I think. Send in the drones, but that's just me. But I mean, really. I mean, we did it in Pakistan, we did it in Iraq and Afghanistan. Why not in Mexico? And I know that's politically incorrect, but my God, what they're doing to our country, what they're doing to their own country. Anyway, I can go on about that. But I started looking on this myself, examining myself and just going, what can I do? What can I do here? And I realized that, as you know, attitude may not be everything, but it's the main thing that will get you through challenging times. And in many ways, you know, after 9/11, we were experiencing challenging times, were we not? I mean, the economy took a tailspin after that. We were all getting ready, geared up to go to war. And I felt like, well, what can I do? I'm too old to go into the military. No one's going to take me. But I could serve my country in another way. So I teamed up with these people, and I created this based on what you're going to see. My book agent said to me after 9/11, when he looked at the book, he goes, my God, this is an incredible book. You got to do something with this, but you really need to rewrite this whole last part here. It needs to be a book on itself. And he said, I want you to look at 9/11 through a different eyes. You get all these conspiracy theories about what happened, you know, explosives and all that. I didn't want to go there with all that. I mean, let them figure that out. I wanted to look at it from a completely different perspective. One, was it possible for us to put out the fires? I know that you look at it and you just go, no way on earth could we have put out the fires, but really when you see this next thing I'm going to show you, you may think differently. Two, if we could have put out the fires, was it possible for us to have rescued the people that were trapped above? I mean, over 2,000 people were trapped above. No way to get out. The roof doors were all locked. No helicopters coming to the rescue. In fact, New York City does not even own one helicopter. That's largely due to after 93, when the bombing happened. Just give you guys a little education here. In 1993, when World Trade Center was bombed, the New York Police Department had a few helicopters, and they were rescuing people off the roof. In fact, they rescued almost 1,000 people off the roof. They were the heroes. The fire department, on the other hand, were using the old school method that they've used for the last 100 years. The fire pull up with the fire trucks, charge into the building, can't go up the elevators because, oh, it's all full of smoke, so you can't use the elevators. Now they got to charge up the stairs with their air oxygen tanks. And they were only like 20, 30 floors up by the time the police department was already up there rescuing all the people, and the fire department got pissed off. They felt that the police department had grandstanded them. Just look it up, it's all on the web there. And they were pissed off, so the fire department lobbied to put all the antennas back up on the roof and to lock the doors permanently so no one could ever use the roof again. And they took the money that the US government gave them, and instead of doing what I had recommended, which was, I thought, okay, well, why don't you guys going about this all wrong? This was part of my debate with the fire departments, was that I thought that your approach to the fires are archaic. Instead of fighting fires from the ground up, because we now have these towering skyscrapers that go hundreds of floors. I mean, can you imagine a fire truck at the base of these buildings here in Dallas? My God, they're going to be like these little toy trucks. What about all the people that are trapped above? How do you get to them? Well, my idea was, well, what if you turn around and put 2 floors on top of the World Trade Centers? They were given $150 million. They could have done that, really lightweight construction. Put 2 lightweight floors on, put some firefighting pods that could lower down the side of the building, and in the event of a major fire, they could actually have these foam cannons that would shoot into the building and spray the fire and put it out, and rescue the people that way with helicopter pads on that. In fact, why don't we have, instead of just having 1 helicopter for the city of New York, why don't we have a squadron of helicopters? And they laughed me out. They thought it was a joke. In fact, there was one firefighter who posted on the New York City's fire department in 2000, exactly 10 months before 911, that the best kept secret is that every fire chief and every city official that has anything to do with high-rise buildings all know that they cannot put out fires in high-rise buildings. It's a known fact. But yet they keep it a secret. Why? Because they know if the insurance companies found out about it, they would turn around and say, we're not going to insure your buildings anymore. That's a problem. So they keep it it's now known as the best kept secret. So this was going on before 911. I knew about it. And so afterwards I thought, okay, how can I help change that? And the only way I knew I could change that was by actually showing what could be done. So I created that, and now I'm starting a company called Skyscraper Defense, and I'm going to be working on robotic firefighting pods that could be lowered down the side of the building via remote control. So in other words, a pilot could be in a helicopter observing the scene. If you remember 911, they just had 1 helicopter hovering around, and all they could do is just watch. They couldn't do anything. And now they'll be able to turn around and remote control. So I started thinking about that, and because a lot of times when I really thought about someone that really had great influence on me at the time, because I remember when John F. Kennedy was assassinated in this city, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Well, obviously, all of you are doing that. And on behalf of all Americans, I have to really salute you because you are making a bigger difference than you think. You may think sometimes that you're not really having that great of effect, and it must feel that way sometimes. But stay with it. Stay with it, because you're closer than you think of actually having a victory, because I've been doing this for now over 30 years. I mean, I went from the point where I didn't know even how to climb a building. I never even thought about climbing a building, so all of a sudden I'm climbing one with really crude equipment, to now where I'm at the point where I'm actually looking at robotic firefighting pods. Think about that. You guys are closer than you think. Maybe the government has to just change their tactics, maybe give you guys drones and stuff. It's just another thought. And after 2008, when the crash happened, like many of us, I just felt like, wow, you're kidding me. Again, the banks get bailed out, and we're watching Wall Street rallying back up again. They're hooraying. And I started thinking about going, well, what can I do here? I got to do something. I cannot just sit back and wait for it to come to me. I have to go to it. So I said, I'm going to climb another building. Now keep in mind, I hadn't climbed a building in over 25 years. 25 years. And I'm thinking, wow, you're kidding me. I remember being with my mom. It was her 75th birthday, and it was 3 days before Labor Day in 2010. And my brother's girlfriend at the time was like, she was a psychiatrist, and she was just kind of asking me questions and wanted to know what made me tick and all that. And she asked me, would you ever consider climbing another building? And I said, as a matter of fact, yes. And she looked at me and says, you're kidding me. She says, at your age? And I says, what does age got to do with it? I said, it's all about the mind. Now, keep in mind, I have kept myself in shape, which is something I'm encouraging all of you to do. Because as you get older, you know, right now you may be young and you're like feeling really strong, but something happens as you get older, and you have to have a certain different mindset. The things that got you in shape when you were younger, you got to do it again. Keep doing it. Don't stop. And so when I came up to the Millennium Tower, this is it right here. It was still is the tallest building in San Francisco. I remember looking up at that and just thinking, oh my God, how am I even going to get on this building? I had no idea how I was going to get on the building. And I had this videographer who was with me. His name is Tony. And a former girlfriend of mine who I hadn't seen in like almost a year, Pia. And we're walking around the building, and it's Labor Day in 2010. And Tony is freaking out. He's just going into panic mode, and I could just see it on him. He's just not sure exactly how to be with it, because he's looking around and he doesn't even know how I'm going to get on the building. He's seeing all these security cameras everywhere, and I find him back to the parking lot, and I say, hey, Tony, what's going on? He says, dude, I just can't handle it. I said, I can't shoot this. And I said, that's okay, I get it. I think maybe you should just take my car. So I gave him the keys to my car, and I watched Tony drive away. Now, Tony's driving away with my car. I'm standing in this parking lot looking up at the Millennium Tower. And imagine the thoughts that are going through my mind. I'm starting to wonder, maybe Tony's picking up on something that I'm not picking up on. Maybe he knows that this is my last climb and I'm actually going to die on this building. Wow, that's a creepy thought. And I wasn't really sure what to do. I'm like going, wow. So I'm walking along the street, and I remember stopping, and Pia turns to me and goes, are you getting an opening or a closing? Now, we all have the gut intuition. We all have that gut feeling sometimes. Now, one thing I have learned, I'm old enough to look back on it, every time I've had that gut feeling, that deep feeling inside that something wasn't quite right, think back on it. You were right every single time. Your gut feeling is your only warning system that you may ever get. Now, you may be on the verge of kicking down a door, okay? And if all of a sudden everything inside you is saying, whoa, 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 wait, listen to that. Don't ignore a warning. that you get like that. Because what if that door is booby-trapped? What if there's a guy on the other side already got a shotgun aimed at you and he's ready to blow you away? Pay attention to it. Because I pay attention to that, and I stood there and I remember there's one way you can always test your gut feeling, okay? And it's one of the things that I've really worked on and developing. If you turn around and just take a nice deep breath and just focus, and you just start, you ask the question, should I do this or shouldn't I do this? And if all of a sudden you find yourself having a hard time breathing and a tightening in your chest and your stomach is just starting to churn, that's a no. Don't ignore it. But if all of a sudden you get this feeling of just whoosh, this feeling like you're getting a breathing and you find yourself, your attitude is just changing and all of a sudden you get an opening where all of a sudden you're going like, no, I'm ready to go for it. That's an opening. It's all systems go. So I was listening to that. But at the same time I had to deal with the thoughts. I kept thinking about Tony. God, you know, it's like, what if he's, I kept battling that. My gut feeling was telling me that I was onto something, that I was right, to go for it. But at the same time, I was wondering, could I be wrong? And I had to like just let him go, let him go, let him go, just let him die. They aren't really my thoughts. There's his thoughts, they're not my thoughts. And so,
thoughts to dissolve, relax your mind.
Your consciousness has awakened. There is no past. There is no future. There is only now.
I sat at the base of the Millennium Tower for about 20 minutes. I had to pick the right timing. And I remember just sitting there trying to get myself in the right place because I hadn't climbed in 25 years. And I'm looking up at this building and I'm like going, oh my God, I'm getting ready to go for it. And this Asian guy comes out and he's on his cell phone. And he's pacing back and forth right in front of me, right where I want to get on the building. And there's limousines pulling up. People like Joe Montana live in this building, so they're coming in and out. And the doorman is opening the door, and I was like waiting for this time, and I just kept doing almost like an Obi-Wan Kenobi thing, where I was like just thinking the thought, you know, you really want to go inside. It's much cooler inside. You don't really want to be outside here. And I remember him looking at me, and there was this moment of like, he almost picked up my thoughts. And he turned around and walked inside. He did his number and walked inside. And the moment he did, I jumped on the building.
A week ago on Labor Day, there was a guy climbing the Millennium Tower. Remember Brett Burkhart running in here and going, there's a guy climbing the Millennium Tower. Going, what the hell? And it was an interesting story that day, but people do this sort of thing from time to time. In fact, this very man does this thing from time to time. And my first reaction was, well, a nice little feature for that day while it's happening. As I read about Dan Goodwin, the story got far, far more fascinating than just that climb. When he talked about the World Trade Center, which he climbed and had involvement in trying to come up with a defense plan for, a rescue plan for, in case people got trapped in the upper stories. When he talked about recovering from stage 4 cancer, in the news in the past week, of course, because of Michael Douglas. When Michael Douglas was on the David Letterman show and said he had stage 4 cancer, you could hear gasps from the audience, from people who knew what stage 4 meant. And on, I thought, this is a far more interesting story than that one day. Dan Goodwin, or Skyscraper Man, as you're called, or Spider Dan, welcome to KGO. How are you?
Thank you very much.
Let me ask you first, what the hell? I mean, seriously.
You know, it was one of those things where I had been working on this book for a while. And a lot of people, you know, since 9/11, I actually had a book with my agent in New York on the day of 9/11. And he gives me a call and he says, you know, why didn't you tell me about the last chapter? And the last chapter was titled the Skyscraper Defense Act. And in that proposed a new department within Homeland Security, and it'd be called the Skyscraper Defense Department. And it would create within each city a special unit that would be the elite of the elite team that would be specifically trained and equipped to fight fires and rescue people in towering skyscrapers. And you know, he goes, God, I wish we knew about this beforehand. I said, well, you know, I've been talking about this for years, and now that 911's happened, you know, and he looked at me, he goes, yeah, now that 911 happened, he says, you know, you're going to really have to redirect this book a little bit. He says, your story is great, but this could potentially be much greater. And I said, well, what do you got in mind? He said, well, I'd focus on 3 things. 1, you know, just look at it from your eyes, your perspective. Was it possible for us to put out the fires?
Yeah.
Just that one thing alone. 2, could we have rescued the nearly 2,000 people that were trapped in the upper floors? And 3, could we have possibly prevented the towers from collapsing? So I was like, thinking about it. I remember leaving his office and I'm going, God, it's like, that's a pretty big task to think about that. And that began a quest for reading every single thing I could get my hands on from then on.
You know, specifically, and we're going to get to the Millennium Tower and everything you did last week. Also want to get to the whole cancer story. Actually, there's a million things to talk to you about. As I said, as I looked into you, this became a far more fascinating story. You climbed the World Trade Center in, what, 83?
Back in 1983, and I, you know, after I climbed it, I told, you know, a bunch of people, I said, you know, you mark my word, someday, you know, terrorists are going to strike, and we're not going to have any plan whatsoever to be able to fight a fire or rescue these people trapped in any one of these buildings here.
Why the flag? Why the American flag?
You know, in all my other buildings, I climbed the Sears Tower, I put a flag up. When I climbed the World Trade Center, I put a flag up. I put a flag in every one of them. And my dad is a veteran from the Korean War, and it's also my way of, I don't know, being patriotic. You know, it's like I think America, you know, I love this country. You know?
And how did you do it today? I mean, were it really suction cups, and did you have any sort of backup plan? And
well, I would say the best backup plan was my mind. You know, because you know, so oftentimes, you know, we're ruled by fear. You know, fear of failure, fear of even trying something. And I have to say, you know, looking at the building, I mean, there's this wall of fear that you're facing. You're like, it's so intimidating to look up at that wall of glass and go, I'm going to go for this. And I needed to conquer it myself. And in doing so, I felt like I was doing it for all the cancer survivors out there. All the people who are fighting for cancer, I wanted to be the rallying call. It's just like, this is it.
After that, there was another trial. And it was a big one in San Francisco. And the city wanted to just drop this and brush it under the rug. They didn't want any trial whatsoever. They just wanted to let me go and just say, don't come back. I said, no, I want a trial. I want to expose the best kept secret. So the best kept secret, as I just shared with you, is that they all know that they can't fight fires and rescue people in upper floors of a building. And they don't want anyone to know about that because they're fearful that if that got out, that what would happen is the insurance companies would no longer cover the buildings, and then there would be a mass exodus of all these high-rise buildings and all this loss of revenue from all the cities. And I get it. They're concerned of what it could actually open this can of worms. However, one thing that did come out in the trial was the fire chief admitted that when they went to the top to greet me, they couldn't get to the top. That they couldn't get to the top because the roof doors were, guess what? Bolted shut. Just like 911. Nothing had been learned. Still the same protocol all across the country. Go to the top of these high-rise buildings, you'll find out that the doors are locked. So that was what came out. They actually, it took them over an hour to get the doors open. They had to have some special locksmith come, and they actually had to use special bolt cutting torches to open the door because no one had the key. They didn't even know how to open the door. So that came out in the trial. And after that, I started realizing, you know, I feel like I'm fighting this battle here. And I realized that if I really wanted to have more in my life, I wanted to actually achieve the things that I wanted to achieve, I personally had to become more. We were talking about that last night. And, you know, I remember talking to this yogi about a month ago. He was having some relationship problems. Not with one gal, but with 3 different women. And I said to him, what are you thinking? He says, if you can't handle one, why are you with three? And it didn't make sense to him. And I said, dude, if you want more, you got to become more. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean I got to become more? And I says, think about it. You just need to become even a better person. And the moment you become a better person, the right person is going to come into your life and everything is just going to be magical. Just watch. Well, since then, it happened so quick, he couldn't believe how quickly it happened, but within 2 or 3 weeks of him actually taking it on, he ended up with this wonderful woman that actually I think is going to work out for him. But I started thinking about that, of what could I do differently? And I started realizing that I had to become the change that I wanted to see in the world. Because when you really think about it, each and every one of us, I know you want to make a difference in the world. And you want to go out there and you want to fight this war against drugs. It's a courageous war, and it's a worthy war, I'm telling you that. We're grateful for you. But if you really want to make a difference, you each have to become more and be the change, because everything that you see in the world becomes a mirror reflection of you in one form or another. And so the more we can change ourselves, the more we're going to find out that our world's going to change. And I'm going to close it out with this video here, just to think about it.
Dedicated to all spiritual activists, truth seekers, and peaceful warriors worldwide.
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Once upon a time, not long ago, there was a boy who would grow and become a great soul. He lived in India, and his name was Gandhi. He believed in human rights, and he fought for equality. He felt so strongly that he trained himself, because he realized first he'd have to change himself. He changed his clothes and decided to walk. Some days he practiced silence and refused to talk. When he was young, he studied to be a lawyer, and then he became a great spiritual warrior. He read from the scriptures of every religion, came to the realization that we're all God's children. Because he understood that we're all equal, he became a spokesman for the people, a karma yogi devoted to service, to spread truth and peace was his purpose. You gotta be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Just like Gandhi. Dedicated his life to the cause, even when it meant breaking unjust laws. He often faced prison and incarceration, but that only strengthened his determination. He said he would make every sacrifice, but that he would never kill or take a life. He used his heart instead of his fist, and he taught non-violence as the way to resist. A peaceful soldier who used his mind to fight for the rights of humankind, but not just people, animals too. In his basic teaching, God is truth. He joined Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindus, Christians, Buddhists, Jains, and Jews. All the many paths that lead into the light that shines bright inside of me and you. You gotta be the change that you wanna see in the world, change just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Be the change that you wanna see in the world, just like Gandhi. Taught an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, and it takes more strength and faith to be kind. With that in mind, Gandhi took a stand against the foreign occupation of his land. When things got violent, Gandhi would fast, not eating for days until the riots would pass. But the biggest event that made the British halt is when Gandhi G decided to harvest all. The British Empire installed a salt tax, and stealing salt was an unlawful act. So Gandhi and his peeps took to the streets, 10,000 deep, they marched to the beach. But when they arrived, they were beaten with clubs, but they didn't fight back, instead they chose love. The foreign military realized they were wrong and eventually decided to go back home. You see, Gandhi G was a very great leader, but before all that, he was shy and meager. As a young child, he was just like you and me, before he became Mahatma Gandhi. The word Mahatma, it means great soul, and it's inside of us just waiting to unfold. If you follow your heart and act real bold, next time it'll be your story that's told. You gotta be the change that you wanna see in the world, the change just like Gandhi. Be the change that
So, what I've come to conclusion is that we can do all the things that we're doing. Oftentimes, we have to do the things we got to do, whether or not it is violence. Sometimes we do have to go to war. Sometimes you have to pull the trigger. Sometimes you got to arrest people that you wish you didn't have to arrest. But don't forget who you are as a person. Don't forget why you became a cop in the first place. Don't lose that, because that very spirit that brought you into the force, the very spirit that brought you into this room, is what's going to get you through all the hard times that could come up ahead of you, or the hard times that you may be going through. And that, my friends, is what I came to share with you, is that all of you have this special gift. You're definitely not your average person. You may think that maybe you don't have any special gifts, but I'm here to tell you, you wouldn't be here if you were just average. You're definitely part of the upper 1%, whether you realize it or not, because not everybody could do what you do. So hold yourself high, think of yourself as being strong, have powerful thoughts, be courageous, be brave, be the shining beacon of hope for the rest of the community. Even though sometimes you feel like you got to dive into the depths of it all, don't forget who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. Rise above it. When you go home, be the best person you can be. Love your wife. Love your kids. Love your community. And don't forget that what you're doing is worth it, because you are making a difference. And I just want all of you to know that on behalf of all of the United States, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Very honored. Thank you.